It has there's a qualification to it, yeah.
To be
Otherwise, it would be
continued.
fine. It's just this one little thing, you know, after you've been in it a while, it's kind of like, oh my God.
Yeah, a girl. Or boo hiss.
Boy, what are you making?
Where are you?
Joy, can you hear me?
Yeah, hold on. I'm almost back.
I know, it's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you making?
I'm
we
making a sweater.
are officially recording.
Okay, so we're recording now, and you just told us. All right, we're back. Thank you, Joy.
Oh, a quick caveat again, just because I have to, sorry.
Yeah.
If you do not want anything about your revealed, please do not reveal anything on the video here because it's being recorded forever. And you never know who's going to watch this and when. So if there's anything you're super sensitive about or want to be secretive about, don't share it because we have no way to edit it. Okay, that's it.
No, thank you. That's very important. So we're back from lunch. Before we get into modern solar returns, which is going to be what we're getting into next, I do want to at least talk through an example of a classical use of the Lord of the Ascendant and the Lord of the Year. So Kelly was a willing and gracious first participant, but we have some other charts. Does anyone else want to go? I mean, I have Beth, Liz, Joy, Courtney, Juliet, Kara, Sarah, and Matt.
Liz raised her hand. You want to use Liz?
Who?
Liz.
Liz raised her hand?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, didn't see it. Okay, let me get your chart up. And I'm gonna put up the chart I normally use, so it's busy. I'm just giving you guys it, but it also gives us more of the essential dignities. So, so Liz, this is your information. And what year do you want to focus in on? You're gonna have to.
How about when I was 44?
Okay, so 44 is what perfection year? Everyone else?
7th?
Ninth.
House perfection year. So again, just to be clear, so there's a couple.
What did she say? 42?
44.
Oh, I sorry. I was thinking 42. My bad.
No, it's okay. So 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44.
Right.
So if we're using whole sign houses, which again, you do not have to use whole sign houses. It's just easier per the system, but you can use it with Placidus, but be sure to remember that you count not from the house cusp with the signs. Otherwise you will trip yourself up. Okay, and let me see if I can get to that, Beth. I see you there, but maybe we just need one chart for this one. We're going to have other turns, especially when we get into modern. So we're going to look at, let me put this away, and we're going to do a solar return. So 44 would have been 2005 for you. Is that correct?
Yes.
My math? Okay. So why don't we do, is there a particular time frame we want to focus in on, or no? Just any time in 2005? I'm going to do March 1st, 2005.
That's fine.
It's going to give me your natal anyway for your solar return for that year, the current. And we're going to stick to it being your natal location. And then I'm going to get both of them up and then go back to sharing the screen. I'm going to do, okay, let me ask you your preference, and I'll give you principal authority here. Do you want dual wheel or bi-wheel? Bi-wheel is when you have one in the center and one on the outer, and then you have dual when they're separate. Which is your preference?
Well, I do it both ways, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Because I'm used to looking at both, so
All right.
you
So
pick.
I'll pick. All right. Am I sharing?
Yeah.
Yes.
See the two wheels? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're natally Cancer rising, right?
Yes.
Okay. So then your chart over here. All right. So she's in her 44th year of life, which means that we're looking at the ninth house, which is ruled by who traditionally?
Jupiter.
And Jupiter is combust and conjoined to the sun in the seventh house. So somehow ninth house themes are tied into seventh house themes in that particular year. And then we have, again, the gaggle of planets there, the stellium of Jupiter, Sun, Mercury, and Saturn. And then, so Jupiter is the Lord of the year. And with Jupiter as the Lord of the year, in this solar return chart, we see Jupiter is at the top of the chart in the 10th house in Libra. So that's interesting considering that, there's a Venus Jupiter connection even in the natal. But there's also a load of planets in the 12th house, more in Sagittarius. The affairs of the 7th house are emphasized in the solar return. So again, 7th house themes are cast up. So what preliminarily do you think happened or is significant during this year of her life, 44th year of life?
Owning, embodying her truth and really owning it.
What does
And
that mean?
Coming into her individuation with it.
I'm still going to press you. What does that mean?
Really finding her own individual sense of what her sense of purpose, what's really true for her, embodying her intuition, really standing confidently in her power.
Okay,
Is that
that's
better?
very clear for me. All right, what else?
Taking responsibility about that,
Okay,
being a greater authority about that.
Well, there's
And-
something,
go on. I'm sorry, go on.
I'm thinking there's something about Saturn's both in the seventh houses here.
Yep.
And so that really has potency, which of course can be mastery, but it can also be huge limitations. And it is in Cancer in the solar return. And I'm just thinking, what does it control? What houses? Anyway, I'm
It
just
controls
piecing
her 7th and her 8th natally. And
Oh.
this is a reversal. She's having a Saturn opposition.
Mhm.
And Saturn is also conjoined to her sun in the 7th. And her sun has moved into the 1st by solar return. Now, again, starting with the Lord of the year, Jupiter is also, she has a direct Sun Jupiter square, which is interesting because she has a Sun Jupiter conjunction. So what do you think that's the manifestation of?
some kind of separation.
It could be a separation. What else could it be?
Did she get married this year?
Let's ask her.
No.
Was there a relationship that was important? Some sort of one-on-one?
Yeah.
Okay.
To me, it looks like a potential loss of a father figure. Saturn is opposite the natal Saturn. There's a heavy emphasis on potential hardship in relationship, and the 12th house has all of that loss, which kind of corresponds to the 6th house too.
What do you say, Liz?
My father had cancer that year, but that wasn't even the significant thing for that year.
Okay.
Well,
Did you
Saturn is in
relocate?
Huh?
Did you relocate?
Yes.
Why did I ask her that?
Jupiter, travel.
What else?
Well, it's a ninth house kind of thing.
It's a ninth house perfection year. That's true. Jupiter is in the seventh, but that's the reason, actually. And this is often forgotten. The seventh house is a house of removal
Oh,
and moving.
Oh,
Why? Because it's the fourth from the seventh. I'm sorry, it's the fourth from the fourth. So literally from the fourth, 1, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th.
oh, yeah. Derivative.
Mhm. So that's another thing to consider. On top of the testimony that we're dealing with a ninth house perfection year, and it's disposited into the seventh house. What else are we dealing with, especially related? Now, see, and this definitely testifies to a big year. Liz will tell us whether this was a good or bad year in a second, but this is going along with what Miranda de Villefranche says, that there's some reversal where you have the ruler of the seventh on the sense of the first, or the cusp of the first. And that's supposed to be, according to him, bad. You might remember I said it's significant, and it doesn't have to be good or bad as much as you're going to remember this year. There's some years we just don't remember, right? I mean, you ask me what was significant about 48, I might not be able to tell you immediately. I remember 50. And not because it was his 50, but big things happened that year. So
is there also something about big things happening with other people and the need to take responsibility with those other people?
Yeah, it seems like the sun, and this is, I hesitated because I don't want to be too psychological here, but it's mastery, taking some control of herself, despite all, through thick and thin.
Yeah.
Because of sun in Cap and opposite its ruler in the seventh, first seventh.
okay.
And then, and it's retrograde too. The ruler is retrograde.
The ruler
It's like
of the year, the Lord of the year.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Mhm.
should say the Lord of the ascendant.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but one thing we haven't touched that I think we should pay attention to, what do you think about the fifth house stellium? I mean, 5 out of 10 planets are in Sag, in the 12th house, which is interesting because that's her 6th house.
Mhm. It's also a Jupiter ruled house.
Correct.
And Jupiter is the Time Lord.
Correct. So what do you think that relates to?
Traveling somewhere far away. It's like huge and out of your control. 12th house, of course, along with philosophies, but it's travel, right?
So,
Space or
Liz,
head space.
Liz, did you move back with your father to help take care of him? You said he had cancer that year.
No,
No? Okay.
Is it
but
about Liz's health? Oh, I'm sorry.
I did move back to where I was born, or the general area.
All right. Did you have any complications? Someone just asked, did you have any issues with your health?
No,
Okay. All right. Did you have any changes? Obviously, if you changed locations, you had a relocation. That also involves dealing with the 6th. So changes related to, yes, work, your routines, everything. Did you have massive changes related to that as well?
yes.
Okay.
It has to do something with out of control, doesn't it? Because it's 12th house. I mean, the
Possibly
archetype.
it could, but not necessarily. Remember, it's the padded room, and you can it depends on your intention. You either can, the 12th house, I kind of define this particular way. You can either, by virtue of being attentive to your rituals and routines, magnify the 12th house by which you step into something willingly larger than yourself, creative process. You know, you're ready to go into the studio to do some whatever work or be on a tennis court. Or if you're negligent related to your routines and rituals from the 6th house, you're going to get fucked up from the floor up. It's really simple.
Okay.
You're going to end up in the hospital. So it doesn't necessarily mean that she lost control as much as she was dealing with some things either intentionally related that were beyond her control, that she on some level was prepared for.
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful. That's kind of what I meant. It's like something happened.
So let's check in. What happened? I mean, you're good at this, Liz. Liz was like, she had a poker face, right? She's good Capricorn. She might be a Cancer rising, but she ain't playing that like it's all on my face shit. She was just like, I'm not giving you a damn thing.
Huge shock. Huge shock.
That's great.
Well, the year was both bad and good. My husband left me for another woman. And so I came back here and I was a massage therapist for 30 years. And then I started integrating into astrology because I've been studying astrology since I was a little girl with my grandmother. She taught me.
Mhm.
And so it's like I, had to shift from doing massage. I had no home. I mean, it's like the rug got pulled out. But the good part is it allowed me to do the astrology and things that I really love to do because it was a hobby and I had to hide it from my husband. So
There we go. So, and you had to hide it from your husband because of philosophical or religious reasons or grounds?
it freaked him out. And if he found my stuff, he'd burn it. So
Was that, well, that seems pretty extreme, but why did it freak him out? Was he religious?
well, he was raised Catholic, but walked out of the church when he was 19. I don't know. I don't understand. I mean,
Oh, okay.
it makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it's a philosophical issue because it's a ruler. It's a couple of interesting things. The ruler of the ninth, the perfection year you're in, is in fall, conjoined to your sun, combust, in the seventh, right? So that would signify him to some degree. That's why I was asking, like, so it was on philosophical grounds, and that's as Matt mentioned. We're dealing with Jupiter as the ruler of the gaggle of planets in the 12th, including your moon. So it's kind of where you kind of stepped into a space that's intentional. And going back to something that Juliet said, it was a point of actualization. You didn't use that word, individualization, individuation. That's right, because you're more from the also using some measure of Jung sensibility. There's an individuation that is also happening by virtue of that. So that's why you also confirm something I've been saying. It's not universally bad, right, to have like your seventh rising. It will emphasize some things related to your seventh, but like relationships, and that's why someone asked about one-on-one, but it was life-changing also in terms of reorientation by relocation. So I think that also became a powerful moment for you.
Sam, can I just make a point too? It does seem really important to carry forward the planets that are in the perfection year, because there we get Venus and the South Node, the loss, the potential loss of a relationship that led to her MC, right? Finding this calling and this new sense of study. And it's like, if you really carry that forward with the rest of the chart, and then we see the echo of the loss of the Venus in the 12th house, it's just really powerful combining all the techniques.
It is, but I'm also going to tie in something because I want you, when you listen to this recording again, and as you're even reflective, and some of you have better memories than I do, you're sharp and remember things immediately. I'm going to give you a caution because I heard it. The caution is be careful of sinology. What is sinology? Is where you take, like, you're putting more emphasis related to the signs than the planets.
Oh, yeah.
It's like what you were saying. You took in Venus and the South Node, and Venus is conjoined to the South Node, which is also kind of what we look at in terms of Jupiter. Jupiter is also in his fall. So there's some way in which she may experience some sense, again, confirmation of loss. One other important thing that you might notice about my kind of thinking and how I piece things together that I like to pass on to you. I think in a parallel universe, I'm not going to say past life because I don't get as much into that, but in a parallel universe, I am sure, multiple parallel universes, I'm sure I'm a lawyer, right? I have a ninth house sun. And what do I mean by that? And why do I say it that way? And what am I teaching in this particular way? Because I believe that, as you're assessing a chart, all the planets are witnesses testifying to something. So what you're looking for is multiple corroborations for something being true. So for instance, do we have corroboration that she may have trouble related to a partner during that 9th house perfection year? We do. We have at least 2, but there's even more. One is that we have corroboration that Venus is conjoined to the south node, and that same, if we use whole sign houses, it'll be different if you use a different system. But Venus is conjoined to the south node, which is a testimony related to some kind of issue related to Venus. I think I said the south node is like that giant sucking noise that you hear in the cosmos, in which something is kind of going back into the other world. This is literally one of the definitions related to Ketu, or the south node. The other testimony is that the sun is conjoined to Jupiter in his fall, which is another thing where you might be dealing with an issue related to relationship that becomes much more complicated related to 7th house affairs. Then the other thing we can say is that in the solar return, we actually have the 7th house reversed into the ascendant. And also we have, instead of a Sun-Jupiter conjunction, we end up having a sun, an exact Sun-Jupiter square. So square testifies to some dynamic tension that's going to highlight what we have as the Sun-Jupiter conjunction in the natal chart. So something's going to manifest related to Sun and Jupiter from its signification, which is the 7th house. So that deals with 2 things. It deals with relationship, as we already talked about, but also, which is why I asked about relocation. So one thing that might be advantageous for you to do, if you're looking for classical sources, in terms of significations of houses and things like that, I would recommend getting a book by 2 authors, one who we lost this year, Helena Avelar and Luis Ribeiro. They're the authors. Helena, I don't know how she passed, but she passed, I think, in March of this year. And the book is On the Heavenly Spheres. And it's an excellent traditional text that explains much of the logic behind that. And one thing to grasp that's different from the modern mind, again, different doesn't mean better. Different from the modern mind is kind of what I'm saying to you, is that you evaluate almost in a very dry way related to the nature of the planet and it's conditioned by essential and accidental dignity first. Your impulse, the modern impulse, and we all have it because I also was raised a modern astrologer initially, is to psychoanalyze and think, oh, I'm thinking more in the psychological. Just imagine for a second, you guys know or starting to learn how hood I can be. And not to say that our medieval counterparts were hood, but you get the idea. If you said like, oh, you're working on this particular point to actualize yourself or to individuate to someone from the 14th century, they'd be like, what? Is my kid going to die? Right? They want bottom line facts in terms of what's likely to materialize in relation to my actual life. My inner life, okay, I'll handle that in church or at the mosque. Now, that's not me saying that you shouldn't be attentive to the inner life. You should, very much so. But that's kind of the bridging the gap. So you can think both. What's the bottom line in terms of what might be happening in this person's life and what may be prompting it, which is more internal. Matt, are we going to get to see your house? We're going to have a tour. We're going to get around to different areas. I'm teasing you.
My son's gone now, so I can get back to my regular desk setup. So,
I'd like to make one comment.
Please.
I'd lived in Puerto Rico for 25 years. So, the argument of should you relocate the chart or whatever, and we did not relocate the chart, and look at how wonderful it came out.
That's true. But we're gonna get into that very question when we talk about modern solar returns. And maybe that's my cue. You've given me that license, Liz, because I was just thinking and debating, should we do another one? But let me ask you, not just Liz, but the whole class, do you think you have a little bit more of a solid grasp of the classical that you're also now ready to move on to modern, or do you want to do one more example? I have my thoughts, but I want to hear yours.
I'd like to work another, I think,
Yeah,
Okay.
let's take another example.
just to hear the
Okay,
delineation.
Juliet says yes, and then I heard someone else say something else.
Well, I'm ready for it too, because I think practice makes perfect, and I'm
Okay,
seeing
then
the
we'll have
drift,
it.
but yeah, thanks.
so
And what I
Beth,
love, go ahead.
you volunteered yourself, is that correct?
I volunteered myself. Can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you. All right, so I'll get your chart up.
Okay.
Well, let me ask you, what year are we going to focus in on?
2004.
2004. So that was when you were 52?
I was 51 until June and 52 after June.
So which one should we do? When did this event happen?
One event, so I had 3 events that year, which I don't normally have that many events that would be major life changing points. One happened in May.
So that means you would be 51. So why don't we do that one? You want to do 51?
As opposed to the one in 52, which happened in October.
Yes. Which one do you want to do?
I think the October one was a bigger event, maybe.
Okay, let's go for that one. So you're 52 then.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to do the solar return for October. When you do this on solar fire, I mean, you can just put any date. It doesn't really matter in that sense. You just have to make sure you have the current return for that time, which would be, oh, that's wrong. Let me try that again, get rid of that. Sorry. I went for 2004, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Exact date would be October 14th.
Okay, I'll put that in. And we'll put it current. Right. So let's get the chart up. All right, can you see the 2 charts? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So on the left is her natal. You're an Aries rising with moon and Pisces. Is that correct?
I was
Natal?
correct.
Okay. So on the right, there's a Scorpio rising chart conjoined to the south node. Her 3rd house sun is moved to the 8th. And the moon, oh wow, that's chilling. Look at the degree of the moon. You guys see it? Can you see it?
28.
Is the ascendant.
28.
It's
Yeah.
directly on her natal ascendant.
Oh.
It's directly on it.
Amazing.
28 to 0. Why does it make it directly on it?
No,
Oh.
the ascendant,
Right.
yeah, not whole signs,
I see. Sorry.
Yeah.
within minutes.
Yeah, whole sign houses, it gets, it's an adjustment because you're used to looking at the ascendant right here, right? I understand. It is kind of like a bit of a hard thing at times. Okay. So she's talking about her 52nd year of life. Her 52nd year of life is what house?
Oh,
Fifth.
The 5th house, which is what? Who's the Lord of the year?
It's gonna be the sun.
The sun.
Yeah.
So the sun. So one thing to note is that we're dealing with some significant thing with a 3rd house theme. Sun, Venus, Mercury, related to the 3rd house. Then for the Lord of the year, the sun ends up with those same planets in the 8th house. So there's some significant thing that relates to a 3rd house theme or issue in the 8th house, with the moon also being on the ascendant of the natal chart. Then on top of that, let me see here. The south node is conjoined to the ascendant So what do you think happened? Or what things are important for her during this year? October. She's given us the time frame, so we have that already.
Well, it's in the 8th house, so, but it would be a cutaway. Something got cut away emotionally because that moon on the ascendant in Aries is like breaking some kind of emotional break.
Okay, let's check in with Beth. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. I thought it would, but you're the authority here, living the life.
Maybe some court scenario with siblings, possibly, and having to claim your courage and will.
Beth?
I don't have any siblings,
Okay.
and I don't think my cousins were involved, but certainly there were friends that surrounded me during this time.
Okay.
Yeah, it cut to the quick. I was just thinking in that relationship that you brought out, the sun with the Mercury, and so it was heart and mind, and I mean the whole trio in the same sign. So it's very close to her identity.
Okay, and her sense of self. All right. What else do we have, especially since we're talking about the sun, being in the 8th in the solar return chart as the Lord of the year? Let's look at the Lord of the Ascendant. The Lord of the Ascendant in the 9th, in fall, in Cancer, along with Saturn, who's also in detriment. Venus is the ruler of the 7th. What kinds of things, what might we be experiencing here with Mars, having this particular position?
Was
And
there
Venus-
some sort of accident that occurred while traveling?
Beth?
No.
Okay, so
There
it's
was
just,
no accident to me.
what?
There was no accident that happened to me. It was,
But to someone else, because it shows a loss of someone close to you?
In 8th house, it could have been someone, someone close, someone else.
Is that true, Beth? Is that what you're alluding to?
yes.
Yes or no? I can't.
And Sam, would it make a difference? I mean, the house is 9th and 8th. They can't see each other. So whatever happened in the 9th house, the 8th house maybe doesn't have clarity about, can't see.
Well, it may not, it can be. That's an excellent question. It's more so because we are talking about the Lord of the year being the sun. It may be that, and Beth already alluded to it, she had friends or she had people around her who supported her because she was dealing with this sudden loss, this cut. And just think about what happens to you when you've had an experience of a sudden loss, whatever. You're beside yourself. You don't know really what's going on. And it can prompt even some deep questions because Mars is in the 9th house, the philosophical and broad, trying to find the broad mindedness of a situation, but Mars is in fall. So a planet in fall, let me put it this way. A planet in fall is in the place of what I've been talking about with essential dignities. I have a whole lecture on essential dignities. It's a place of unbelonging. When I say unbelonging, it suddenly feels dislocated, perhaps not by its own will. It's like an exile of a sort, complicated with the fact that it remembers home. So being in fall is much like where you recognize being in a difficult situation and the hardship of it. It's kind of like being a refugee.
One other question I have, just noticing in the natal, her Mars and Moon are trine, yet in the solar return they're square by sign.
That's true. They're also square literally.
Yeah.
I mean,
You're right.
you can give them a 5-degree orb.
Yeah.
The other thing, Mars is well placed. So meaning by sign in her natal. So she will get through this, but
And
in
mutual.
that particular year, it would be very difficult for her by virtue of that Mars being in fall.
Mhm. And very angular. Oh,
Mars?
well, no, I guess not. It's
No.
I'm
But
looking at the midheaven a little further away there now.
but the sun is the ruler of the midheaven, so this is something that is likely to show up in the life
Mhm.
by this being like a solar year, meaning by the Lord of the year. Also, we can see the plummeting depths, something we haven't talked about, the Sun-Pluto opposition. That's something she's also experiencing. So
But I hope this isn't true, but since the sun rules the fifth house in her natal chart, did something happen to a child?
It was not a child. It was, should I say yet what it is?
yeah, you can say it now.
Okay, so everything you have said really fits. My ex-husband died, and it was unexpected, at least to me. And he may have been childlike because I had left him because of lots of addiction and alcohol and drug abuse business. But he was my true love, and we had gotten married young in life. And leaving him was not hard for me. It was really hard on him. I had a lot of fear and grief.
Mhm.
There was another woman that he worked for, and this woman felt like he had been murdered. And so I ended up having all this fear because why would he be murdered? And he was doing some things. I don't know exactly what he was doing. He was doing secretive stuff for the Smithsonian Institute, and he had given me his phone number for the phone he was using for work. And this is in 2004, so our phones were different than they are now. And the person that was accused of killing him did have his phone, had taken his phone. And and he was also a practitioner of black magic, which may or may not matter, but for some reason it added to my fear. And so I took his computers and the brains of his computers and hid them in a place that was locked up 3 different ways because I thought they were trying to get something from his computers. But I also had to deal with the fact of my whole life with him. We were married 27 years, and I had to, it was like I was in grief again. It was not only did I leave him, but I was feeling it. Well, anyway, it was the most emotional time of my life.
Which makes sense, and I'm sorry that you went through that.
So I
Yeah,
was wrong
that's-
for you, though.
I
So that's
appreciate you sharing this. I think what is a clear signification of the ex-husband that we didn't chime in on, that's now, you can see, we could see something had happened and it was traumatic, all these particular things, including, what signifies to the death of someone like your ex-husband is that we can see from the solar return chart, it would be the 8th from the 7th, which takes us really to the 2nd, which is in opposition to your sun.
yes.
That's one. The other thing that testifies to it is that the same, trio of planets replicate themselves in different degrees, but still are together in this 8th house. And Venus rules the 7th in both the natal chart and the solar return chart.
Oh, wow.
So it's definitely signifying. I mean, I would have thought, yes, neighborhood, possibly the children. So these were not bad guesses. It just
No.
wasn't the right thing. I mean, but they were not unreasonable.
Sam, can I ask a question?
You can, but let me finish that thought, and then definitely, Juliet, I want to hear your question. The thing what's most important when you're counseling and talking through the solar return is not the gotcha. Oh, I nailed it. I got it. It's more so what is the general theme and issue of what's happening in this person's life? There is no way I would have looked at her solar return chart, the Lord of the year, and say, like, this was a rosy year. It looks completely different than Liz's chart, which had some mixed blessings. This is not that. So what you want to focus in on is where the person may have a complication. And we might have talked about in terms of relationships, especially in terms of Sun being opposite to Pluto, Venus ruling, the seventh also ruling her second. But the second has come to the seventh. So on some level, and then the moon being conjoined to the ascendant, bet your bottom dollar that it was going to be an emotional year. Somehow. Juliet, your question, please.
I was just curious, the sun being the Time Lord, is that correct?
Yes.
Would you give any credence to that Uranus in Pisces in the 5th house of the solar return? Just because it's naturally ruled by the sun? It's like the shock from the alcoholic.
When you say naturally ruled by the sun, help me out. What do you mean?
Well, in a natural astrological chart, starting with Aries going around, but I suppose you don't go to a natural ruler, 5th house. You would be locked into Jupiter being
generally, but when you say Uranus, even if we were going to go with that idea, that would be, oh, you mean Uranus being the sign of the sun, meaning
no, just influencing the shock of the first husband being an alcoholic, that the shock is coming to the son of Beth with the alcoholic ex-husband.
I think I'm starting to follow, but I mean, that can be seen a couple different ways. There's a Jupiter-Uranus opposition. Uranus, already in her natal chart has a square to Saturn in the 7th. And if I think what you're saying, the sun, you're going with the idea of natural ruler ruling the 5th. And the Uranus being in there, sure, you could take that. I think that gets complicated, but okay. I understand your logic.
All right. I was just curious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is the Neptune trining the Venus there.
Yes.
Almost exactly, which might speak to the addictive tendencies too.
Which
and Venus ruling the 7th being the ex-husband.
This is replicated twice, by the way. Venus exactly trines Neptune in the natal, and then exactly trines Neptune in the solar return.
Right.
Remember, that's why I told you guys, it's hocus pocus. You'll see things as you kind of look at them and see if they're parallels. And I'll tell you, I mean, I don't think you guys will mind if I say this shit gets spooky after a while. It's like, wait, how is that even happening? It manifests. That's why you say, I quote Anthony Lewis, which he has a great book on solar revolutions or solar returns. Again, the author's name is Anthony Lewis. He kind of does a compendium looking at what I'm doing for this workshop, but I'm doing a little more looking at, the idea of solar returns, modern and classical. But he says similarity is really in dissimilarity what you're looking for in relation to the solar return. Okay, just to stay on target, because we only have an hour and a half, believe it or not, of this workshop. I find it hard to believe. We're now going to move back, and then someone has a question or a thought. Okay, we're just going to move and go forward into modern. But does someone have a question? I feel like I cut someone off.
Oh, I was going to babble away about some, but it's okay. We'll move on.
Okay. I do want to again thank Beth for sharing, such a moving time in her life. And I'm sorry about the loss of your husband, or ex-husband, and the circumstances, but thank you for that.
Well, and thank you for letting me share that. And I will say that there were two wonderful things that happened that same year that were not as emotional as something awful happening, because I met the man that I've been with now for the past 17 years.
Well, that is emotional too. I mean, it highlights the moon on the ascendant. It's just not awful. So that's a good thing.
I did, it reminds me of what I did want to say, because I couldn't see the chart, so I couldn't quite focus. But there was something about, because I was relating about what I was trying to synthesize about that fifth house, like possibility. But the whole idea of the moon, back to the moon conjunct that ascendant of her natal, is that there's a breaking of like childhood romance, you could say, the whole individuation from that sense, but this whole into her real self, you know, through all those different aspects. So, but right now anyway, thank you very much.
Cool. So what are the key components of modern solar returns? And thank you, Sue. Sorry, I just want to get back on track. Discussion of various methods. So I mentioned this before, but here's a little more spelled out difference. So there's an obsession with timing, more techniques related to progressions or advancing the chart. It's technique driven. Various house systems are used, modern rulerships are used, sidereal considerations, advances in travel. I mentioned the keywords and cookbook interpretations and the math. And when I say the math, I mean, there's more math that's been added in terms of what we relate to with the modern sensibility. So let's talk about technique questions. So there are parallels to the classical tradition. The solar return chart is not a standalone chart, but used in tandem with the natal to dictate when something promised in the natal is likely to manifest. This is one thing that, you know, has to be debunked when we talk about solar return charts, because I see some astrologers, mainly on social media, you know, talk about the solar return chart without referencing the natal, which is just god awful weird. Because it's like, it's not suddenly you're going to have a chart, like if you have Jupiter in the second house and it's in Cancer, it doesn't suddenly mean you're going to be rich, especially if you say have Jupiter in Capricorn in the second house natally. What it might mean, because now you get the picture, those two are opposed. It might mean like, oh, you make like $200,000, but you have like 140 due in arrears, right? So you have $60,000 left. So, I mean, you made a lot of money, but you also spent a lot of money. Anthony Lewis cites this astrologer, Vauquin, who says the solar return ascendant acts like a weather vane, giving you some sense of direction as what is happening in this life, you know, not this life, this year. It unlocks key interests and events for the year. The solar return chart cannot introduce what's not embedded in the original natal chart, which is, again, kind of to drill that home. So that's where you have a connection, a radix to the tradition. Now, things get different. And this came up early in the workshop, which I'm grateful for. So I'm grateful that Juliet brought this up. Which houses and rulers do you use? Because, you know, if we're talking about more modern, and you're talking about Aquarius on the cusp of the ascendant, you could use Uranus, or would you use Saturn? Here's a little short list of modern astrologers and what they use. Lewis uses Placidus, like Vauquin did, and Tebbs and Merriman. I mean Carol Tebbs and I mean Ray Merriman, who are authors specializing in using solar returns. Marin and Lilly, both classical astrologers, medieval astrologers, use Regiomontanus. Mark Penfield uses Porphyry. Another author, Deanna Rose, who wrote a book on solar returns, uses Coke. Demetra George uses whole sign houses. James A. Esselman, who's a sidereal astrologer more so, uses Campanus. So which one do you use? Why a house system? Now, I'm not going to get deep into this because I have a whole lecture on this from Thursday. So I just wanted to bring up that there are different house systems you can use for your solar returns, right? Now, in terms of why you might use it, again, check out that lecture from Thursday, but I won't repeat myself. And I just wanted to bring home that this is a question to figure out as using modern solar return techniques. But that doesn't mean that you can't be attentive to houses in using solar returns. So angularity from the annual chart, which is just another fancy name for the solar return chart, or the natal, is über alles, right? Which is overall. I mean, that's kind of the key thing. When you have, like, so for instance, with the examples that we've seen so far, when a planet was angular, it manifested in that person's life. It wasn't like, oh, like when we were talking about the Jupiter in, with, I believe it was Liz's chart, Jupiter in Capricorn as the ruler of the ninth, that showed up. That's going to be there. So that's still true when we're using modern. House cusps are used more in the modern sense, including seeing interceptions as units, like Cancer on the cusp of the 12th and 1st as jointly angular. So that's a different perception, because we wouldn't have that as a focus or even a thought as much with a traditional astrologer. Also, when you have interceptions, there's a latent promise to be determined by the ruler and may have become more internal, enshrouded. So what's cool about the modern take using interceptions is that this is another dynamic when you're using Placidus or another quadrant house system. If there's an intercepted house like Pisces, then the affairs related to Pisces and then that ruler are going to be evident as well. So if you have Aquarius rising, Pisces is intercepted in the first house, and you have Aries in the cusp of the second house, then you're dealing with, in the modern sense, the notions of what is playing out with Saturn or Uranus. You also have Jupiter or Neptune, all in relation to that first house. So it becomes a little more complicated. And you may say that the themes related to Pisces or Jupiter or Neptune, and I emphasize more planets than signs, are going to play out in some dimension of that year. Emphasis is given to house natures. This is another difference. Like, I haven't mentioned this author, Mary Fortier-Shay's book, which I'm going to cite in just a second, the next slide. She looks at the cyclical movement of the sun through angular, succedent, and cadent houses in quarters, meaning that the sun moves clockwise through the 1st, the 10th, because remember, clockwise, you might remember from my lecture on Thursday, moves this way, primary motion. It moves to the angular, succedent, and cadent houses over a 33-year period. So every 10 years, roughly, it will change into a different set of houses. I'll give you an illustration in a second. The next thing to know is that the natures of signs emphasize for the ascendant and midheaven, or the descendant and IC. So it's going to be more related to the modality. So if you have cardinal signs rising and then culminating, it'll be change within conscious control, things that you want to make happen and that you can make happen, that you're ready to shake things loose. So I'm going to show a little later my chart for my solar return. And Capricorn was rising for this year. So when I saw this, and I saw it for last year too, for Libra, I was like, I can make the change that I want to make because I wanted to move. And it seemed like the green light was given because the cardinality was emphasized for the midheaven and for the ascendant. Fixity, though, when you have fixed angles and other things that testify this, could mean the maintenance of the status quo. You ain't going nowhere, right? You know, in terms of things being, you know, from the natal position. And this is all assuming that you're using, this is an important point. When I talk about these cycles, this is using a consistent location. If you change the location, then obviously it's going to change the modality and then also the houses. So if like 1 year you're in Santa Fe, another year you're in Denver, another year, you're in Seattle, it's going to change how all this works. So you have to be in a consistent location. So you can use your birth location if you want it. But we'll talk about the differences with that in a second. Mutability, a quality of forced, uncontrolled change that year. So that's another thing that will be up in the mix and thrown up in the air and what you might worry about, or not even worry, but what you might have to contend with. And then mixed, where you have cardinal, angle, ascendant, and then you have something mutable, let's say at the midheaven, or fixed, it's going to be a variance between these modalities, change within conscious control or some way in which some things stay the same. You move, but you still feel somewhat the same way. Exactly. Right. I don't know who that was, but you get the idea. I think it was John.
Sorry.
It's all right. No, I'm just messing with you. All right. So this is Mary Forte Shea's book, which I recommend to you. Planets in Solar Returns, Yearly Cycles of Transformation and Growth. And she brings up, I think she was the first to kind of bring up this very important and interesting point that, as you can see, using a set and standard and consistent location, you will see that over 10 years, you'll notice that the sun will go through, like in this example, angular houses. So it goes to the 1st, to the 10th, to the 7th, to the 4th. There's one qualification here, and this is the same thing, but you're observing a consistency with the midheaven. So she's just focusing on the midheaven here. It's going to be a similar point as it's going through the fixed cross, as you see up here. One thing to know about her system and this idea, it's clear to see when you're using the house system that she uses, which is Placidus. When you use whole sign houses, and I'm going to give you an example of that, you will see a difference. There's a bit of a shade of difference, so you have to fudge a little bit. I think this is really cool, and I think it's useful because as you're going through angular houses, you're going to see a theme related to angularity. As you're going through succedent, those things that deal with how we hold value, related to ourselves, you're going to see those particular themes, and the same thing related to cadent. How I define the cadent houses, just to be clear, is I think they relate more to how you have a sense of proximity, whether you're talking about, near or far relation to things. And they also relate to knowledge. So for instance, the 6th house as a cadent house relates to those things that are within our control by which we use knowledge to benefit ourselves, like your rituals, your routines, being able to get to work. That's why I think, by the way, the 6th house comes to signify jobs, because in our modern lives, we have a sense of routine in terms of going to our jobs, usually 5 days out of the week. The classical notion of the 6th house had nothing to do with work. It had everything with labor, but not necessarily you laboring per se. It's more being a servant or having servants. Okay. How many of you know this guy, Shah Rukh Khan? Never seen him before in your life? All right. So let me give you a little bit of backstory, and this is what we're going to focus on for the next few minutes as a chart. And SRK is just, that's how he's known as, Shah Rukh Khan, even though he prefers it all being one word for his name. Now, you shouldn't feel too bad that you haven't heard about him, because he's mainly an Indian actor. Not mainly, he is an Indian actor. But here's the thing. He is the biggest actor in the world. Okay. Now you might say, like, what do you mean? It's not Brad Pitt. Oh, is it? Okay. I know at least one person has hit me up and said, I'm very familiar with SRK. That's cool. When I say he's the biggest actor in the world, let's take into some data. He is the biggest actor in India, which has 1 billion people. 1. 2, he also is seen as a huge actor for all, or not all, but many of the Indians in diaspora around the world, right? Now, you say like, okay, well, how am I supposed to know? I'm not Indian. How do you know? Whatever. Well, the reason why I got intrigued by him is that I've been to India a few times, and at least once for a very extended time. And I just saw him everywhere on underwear. When I say underwear, literally like underwear commercials or in ads, and for watches and for t-shirts, all these different things. And I'm like, who is this dude? Like, why is he everywhere? I mean, when I say ubiquitous, I mean everywhere. And me with my natural skeptic ass is like, well, is he really that good? So I went to see a film with a friend of mine. The name of the film, I don't know if you'll ever see it. It's called Chak De, which means get up. And it's the story of women's field hockey team coming together. And India had the idea, I'm forgetting the year, of pulling, some of the top-notch girls, women from all around India to come together. Now, that's a big deal because, for we Yanks, there's something that we don't realize, even though, yeah, we have the United States of America, but India has some 30-something languages or more, and same number of states, or even a greater number of languages. So the idea of pulling together the nation is a very hard concept because it was a colonial, it was a colony, right? So it was more a creation of the British than indigenous Indians. So Shah Rukh Khan, played the coach of this team. And it was about dealing with all the rough edges of bringing these people from different cultures and countries together, not countries, but states and languages. So, it has a good ending, but I saw his acting, and the movie's in Hindi. Okay, it has English subtitles, but it's in Hindi, and I saw it in an Indian theater, and I had my dear friend kind of also trying to help me and saying, translate, but I could read what's there. But I listened to his speech in Hindi, and I gotta say I was moved, and I'm just listening at, I wasn't necessarily, I did pay attention to the words, I have the general sense. And he is a phenomenal actor, and you can see, I mean, his birth information is not there. He's a Scorpio, and the sun is right at the ascendant. He conveys with such passion and depth, and he's played a range of different characters. He's, been a villain, or set of villains, and he's also been romantic comedies. He's like, he can do it all. So I'm very impressed with Shah Rukh Khan. Sidebar, but related. What's funny, it's not funny, it's not ha-ha funny, but it's deeply ironic and troubling. For a number of years, especially in the 2010s to like, I guess the 20s, whenever Shah Rukh Khan would come to the United States, he was always accosted and then, put in a room for interrogation. Now just think about that in terms of the context of it. I told you, he's the biggest actor in the world, but he comes to the United States and treated like a terrorist. So it's just, it just really breaks my heart to see that. So here's a little more about his chart. He has this moon in Aquarius, widely opposite to his midheaven. What is compelling is his Mercury is trine to the lot of fortune. Again, this is his natal chart. More testimony related to his sense of passion is this Mars conjoined to Venus, also square to his Pluto and Uranus in Virgo, sense of grit and the things that he conveys. Let me see if there's anything else there. I mean, that's a good start. And Jupiter ruling his second house, and Jupiter then also ruling his fifth house. And Jupiter is one of the strongest planets in this chart because it's exalted, even though it's retrograde as well. So what we're going to look at is his solar return briefly, because actually the point is not to delineate his chart, but it is interesting. You see his natal, we're looking more so at his natal chart here. And we're particularly interested in his what I guess would be his 26th year of life, as he's going toward his 27th year of life, but really his 26th year of life. His 26th year of life would be what? What perfection year? Third. And Saturn is the Lord of the year. So Saturn ends up in the 5th house. So we're going to look at the Lord of the year. How does Saturn shape up? Let me just move some things around. How does Saturn shape up in his solar return? Well, as the Lord of the year, he's the ruler of the midheaven. In terms of the moon, he's also the ruler of the moon. He's trine to the ascendant. So that's powerful. Saturn is also going toward a conjunction to his natal moon. Saturn is also opposite to his midheaven in his natal chart, this solar return. Then we see something interesting related to the Lord of the ascendant. Mercury is angular in this chart, conjoined to the south node, which would seem to be bad, but again, it's still with some measure of angularity. So what kind of happens during this year in terms of just looking at it? And one other thing to note is that the sun ends up in a cadent house. Now, technically, this is where I told you have to fudge. Actually, technically, the midheaven should be here. And if you were using Placidus, the sun would be actually in an angular house. So it would be more so he would be clearly visible. This becomes important because when we look, okay, I went too far. Here we go. Actually, I was looking at the wrong chart. I was wrong looking at 91. Then when we go to 92, which is above here, I'm sorry. It is angular here. I pressed a button too fast, so I missed a very important point. So this is for 90, this is for 91. So we have an angular sun here. That's what's important, and that's what he's contending with. The moon, we have the ascendant exactly conjoined to his angular moon for 91. Now, why am I focused on 91? Digwana, his first big breakout film, became a runaway hit in India and catapulted him into fame. Before that, he played bit parts. He played more like the idea in terms of TV. And it's also big in terms of also validating his ascendant, his solar return ascendant being on his moon, because he went into film to honor his mother. And I said to honor his mother, I guess, because he was, struck by a profound level of grief. So again, dealing with his third house perfection year, the Saturn also ends up angular. Not surprisingly, if we were using Placidus and the Mary Fortier-Shea recommendation, this sun would end up in the 7th house, which is what I was trying to say. So this is for 92, the following year. So in June of 91, he has a runaway hit. By the time he gets to his 27th year of life, he has established himself as a star. Now, the only difference is this 27th year of life positions him in a 4th house perfection year. And, for 92, it's more so, we still have Saturn very prominent in this chart, and it ties in Gemini. What is Gemini in this chart? Natally, again, I didn't have to go back. It's the 8th house. Now, you may have a question. Sam, you said the 8th house is a difficult house where he may have had some stress, death, but you're saying his 27th year of life was actually quite good. So why didn't it play out in terms of this, especially the North Node? His natal North Node ends up conjoined to the ascendant. there's something in the concept I want to introduce you to that I haven't talked about before, and I use it a lot in delineation or consultation with my clients. I believe we are given a series of tasks with our charts. Whether they become good or bad depends on the task or how we approach the task. Another way I might say that is I think we can find a way to hack the code in order to, release the task. So he's going through a fourth house perfection year, which unleashes the Saturn, ties in his moon, and he ends up with the solar return ascendant being in his eighth house. How did he get away from, get around that? He played villains the whole year. Now, I don't know if he had a Jyotishi, an Indian astrologer, who kind of coached him through this because they use a different system, but he was able to fulfill the task of dealing with the shadow, the darkness of things, the ways in which we experience the eighth house by virtue of that. This is not a unknown concept. I think, I want to say it was Bernadette Brady, even though I can't seem to find the story in her book, The Eagle and the Lark, who relayed how she was doing a consultation for a woman who was also going through a difficult time by her transit. And I don't remember the transit right now. And Bernadette I believe it was Bernadette, kept asking her, well, is this happening? That, no, the woman's like, no, everything's fine in my life, blah, blah, blah. And, the astrologer was frustrated because like, well, these factors should be somehow playing out in your life. It turns out the woman was an actor, and she's like, well, I am playing a person who is insane in a play that I'm in. Oh, so there's a way in which you can find an outlet for what are the negative elements related to your chart. And sometimes it can be very simple. I'll give you another example. During a time when Saturn was conjoined to my sun, again, I'm just talking about transits, not as much about solar returns, but you get the idea. Saturn was conjoined to my sun. So what I decided to do was honor Saturn rather than, wait for some horrible worst case scenario. So I got black kettlebells and started lifting weights with kettlebells and doing that. And that was my way of honoring Saturn. I have a friend who's into astrology, but he has a very Debbie Downer view of astrology, and he's macabre, but we get at each other. I'm a Scorpio, he's a Pisces. We have, a great sense of connection. But, he would text me every other day as Saturn was conjoining my sun and saying like, are you dead yet? Are you okay? How's Saturn kicking your ass? And I'm like, I'm kicking Saturn's ass, because I decided to hack by honoring what's happening per the chart. So this is another way in which you can be proactive rather than reactive.
Sam, can I make a quick observation?
Yes.
Just as you may or may not know, but I did research years ago. This is a slight tangent on midpoints, specifically with Jupiter Pluto midpoints and famous people and very wealthy people. And that person that you have there has Sun equals Jupiter Pluto midpoint exact, which is one of the signatures for prominence and success. Big success.
Wow. No, that's not a tangent. You can bring in to this so much if if you're skilled and schooled in it. That's what you can do. Yeah. So
that just jumped out at me because I knew whenever somebody tells me somebody is successful at that level, I just assume that it's there, and often, like, I don't know, it's got to be 7 out of 10 times it's there.
70% is good odds.
Reliable.
Yeah, 70% is good odds.
Yeah, it is.
All right, rulership question. To use modern rulers or not is the question, and at the caution and choice of the astrologer. Know your epistemological setting. So there's another thing that happens with modern astrology and with solar returns. Do you precess, meaning do you, got sidereal? That's my attempt at a joke. So what is that? What am I talking about? So Mark Penfield advocates for precessing solar returns in his book, solar returns in your face, which I think is largely out of print, those returns are for the current place of residence, like wherever you are in the world, not necessarily your natal. So what is the precessed return? The non-precessed return or chart, and by the way, it's making allowance for how we talk about the precession of the equinoxes. So by the time you're 72 years old, because remember, just as we have the precession of the equinoxes, the solar position of anything in your chart will change by 1 full degree over 72 years.
Yep.
Okay, a full degree. So when you look at your solar return at 36, it should be a full half degree away from your natal position. So by the time you get to 72, inshallah, that you get there, it will be a degree away. So I'm born at 29 degrees and 45 minutes of Scorpio. So by precession, I am going to, by the time I'm 72 or at 72, I'm going to be a full 45 minutes into Sagittarius. 0 degrees, 45 minutes. Okay. As an example, I mean, my chart is fairly simple in that way. Okay. What Lewis says is that the non-precessed chart seems to be more psychological and inner-directed, whereas the precessed chart appears more event-oriented and outwardly directed. James Esselman, who exclusively uses sidereal as there's no need for precession, he also adds the idea of emphasis with foreground, middle ground, and background planets correlated to angular and succeedant and cadent houses. Not necessarily as necessary, but it's good to mention. Also, he uses parents, which is measured from the prime vertical, something I talked about a little bit on Thursday. So I want to show you this, and then we're going to invite you to play with it, either in your software, and I don't know if let me just check the time. Maybe we won't, but you can play with it on your own. And I'm going to give you an illustration from my chart. So, and then I can also, let me see if I show you. No, I can show you, if time permits, how to do a precession. If you're using Astro Gold, you just look where it says precessed. Solar Fire is a similar thing. And I think you can do it in Sirius and Kepler. I don't know how to do it if you're using Time Passages, because I don't have that software. So it depends on what you have. Anyway, my natal chart is in the center. My solar return chart is I did it for the natal location, November 22nd, 1994. So that's what you're looking at here. And the outer wheel is my precess chart, right? And that's also for where I exactly was, as per the recommendation of Mark Penfield. I was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Okay. So you might see that, well, first off, how old am I? In 1994, and I'm born in 67, how old was I?
You turned 27, right?
I was 27. Okay. So that's a 4th house perfection year. So that's going to involve Mercury. So if you use Placidus, Mercury ends up in my 8th, but if you're using whole sign, it would be in my 9th, right? So I don't have any interceptions using Placidus. So this is pretty easy in terms of everything mostly being the same. So Mercury would be technically in my 9th. I had just gotten out of graduate school, other particular things, kind of settling. I was also working for a publisher at the time. We're just coming out of dealing with working for a publisher. Anyway, what's significant here? Well, there's a couple things that are interesting. So if you look at the solar return chart, I have the ascendant at conjoined to Uranus. I also have Pluto conjoined to my sun. And the other thing, this ascendant is also opposite to My Saturn, the thing to also note, because I have 6 degrees of Pisces rising, Saturn is conjoined to my ascendant. The Lord of the year again is Mercury. Mercury's in Scorpio. Also in that chart and conjoined to the North Node. So that was one particular thing. And Mercury also rules my 7th house. Not so much about relationship, but I want to show you what the precessed return really shows, because remember, it is much more event-oriented and outwardly directed. The ascendant for that precessed return is directly opposite to the moon. Now, why this is chilling, and this is why I don't want you to fully discount the idea of precession. Now, philosophically, I will give you my opinion in a second. But just looking at cold hard facts, what do you think this ascendant opposite to my natal moon might mean? Because it doesn't happen at all with the non-precessed charts. So what do you think ascendant opposite my natal moon might mean?
Care, somehow being a nurturing person, or else, well, it's in Leo, yeah, but there's nurturing, somehow caring in the 7th, people and other people, maybe mother.
Okay. Caring and dealing with mother. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Might have become a parent.
Might have become a parent. Because it's the moon. What else?
And also rules your 5th.
It rules my 5th.
Or
It
counseling, like you could be a counselor. I mean, 7th house, you're counseling others people.
Yes. Or counseling others. That's also another point of signification. But remember, the moon becomes angular too. So angularity will speak the loudest. It will be a lunar issue. The other thing to take note that I forgot to mention, because it's hard to see with this yellow, I'm sorry. These are Uranus and Neptune also conjoined to Mars, which is the ruler of this Mercury, and it's exalted. So that's also significant in terms of something happening. In the interest of time, I'll tell you what happened. And this is why, Saturn also on the ascendant means that I'm dealing with some measure of responsibility, some heaviness, something that will weigh related to my sense of being. So that's another thing that's signified. My mom died suddenly. Now, but there's some indications using more the non-precessed, Pluto conjoined to the sun, sure. But in terms of literally highlighting the moon, and then as someone picked up about the mother, that's from the precessed return. So there is this argument that using the precession may be a way to look at what events, cold hard things that may happen. Now, philosophically, before I move on, I have an objection to precession. My objection to precession, philosophically, is why in the hell would I start precessing a solar return and I don't precess anything else as a tropical astrologer? It just seems wonky. You don't precess your progressions. We don't precess, any other kind of thing. So it just seems odd to do it philosophically for, just the solar return. And just because it's the sun, you're not sidereal astrologers. We don't precess anything else, like even a natal chart. So I have an issue with it, but because I can hold two ideas, and I think you can two at once, I can't deny that there's something that does show up. And I've done it with other solar returns in this one, but this is the most striking. So I would encourage you to experiment with it on your own. I think if we had more time, I would definitely get you to do it. But this is what is really cool. Not just cool as in like, oh, that's fantastic, as much as interesting and worth looking at and taking some measure of seriousness. Okay, this we do need to make time for. Do you relocate the chart do you chase the sun, as I call it? You know, what do we do? Well, let's talk about it. Marinus, Merriman, Bob Marks, and Mary Forte Shea, which I call the 4 M's, all believe in chasing the sun or working the angles of your annual return, which is the solar return, to maximize the good and minimize the bad in your solar return, like putting the benefics on the angle. Shea has an actual typography, Mary Forte Shea. Natal location is more like a progression of 1 day after birth equals 1 day of life. So if you stick to your natal location, your current residence reflects the internal shifts you have made as your life has progressed. The actual location is most accurate because it reflects your current state of mind and your free will choices. What do I mean by this? Now, I also would say I'm skeptical of this, but again, skepticism doesn't mean then that you shouldn't entertain it, but my job is to teach you, what are things that modern astrologers do. And I'll tell you my skepticism first in a little bit, but the last thing she means is I can just use my chart. Well, no, I'll pick on John. Okay, right? Because I think I know a little bit about John. So John, you were born in Philadelphia, right?
I was.
Okay, so that's his natal location. His current residence, as far as I know, is Seattle, right? So he's in Seattle. If John and Marcela decided to go to Mexico, right, to visit her family, right, on his birthday sometime, I forget if you're October or November, which one, November?
Mhm.
Then, for his birthday, then the actual location would be Mexico,
Mhm.
right? So that's what she means by actual location. So Bob Marks and Merriman, Ray Merriman to be specific, they are people who are very big into finding the location that will best work their angles for their annual return. And they tell other people to do this. Where I'm critical is not necessarily on the level of the astrology, because I don't think this is necessarily wrong. My issue is that I don't have the kind of clientele who I say like, well, you know what? I definitely think you should be in Bali this year for your solar return.
Yeah.
Right? That's not my clientele.
Yeah.
Like when I talk to Ray, and Ray is a very successful astrologer and financial astrologer. And, I worked with him for a good number of years with Isar. I said, well, if I would talk to him, especially for meetings or whatever, where are you, Ray? Oh, I decided to go to Bavaria, for my solar return. His birthday's in, January. So I'm in Bavaria, or this year, next year, I might actually be in Arizona. So he travels to find and optimize his solar return. That's cool. Many of us can't do that. So if I say to my clients, like, really, one of the best places on earth, where you can use this Jupiter and this Saturn is, sometimes simply Vancouver. I know you're in New York right now and you just told me you lost your job, but Vancouver is where it's at. I'm not going to do that. So that would be my critique of it. But what I want to show you is that, and this is what I'm going to encourage you to do. I had to test it. Now, I want to show you, I did it 4 different ways for, this is more so for my 30th year of life. And we're not going to spend too much time on this, but I will just reveal to you. So here's for my natal location. And again, I know you don't have my natal chart, so I'll just get it right here. I'm a Pisces rising, right? And then Moon in Leo here. So you have some sense of it. So what happens? This is, and I'm using Placidus just for ease. So this is for the natal location. So this is emphasizing my 5th house. So 5th house themes would be emphasized. I was in the 7th house perfection year. So that would be the Lord of the year is Mercury. So Mercury ends up in the 6th house in this chart. But he's conjoined to my midheaven, because my midheaven is at 17 degrees of Sagittarius. So there would be some Mercury thing that's happening, and Mercury is also the lord of the moon and the North Node, which again, he's the lord of the year. So, and the North Node is actually at the well, my Sag midheaven ends up at the North bending, so it's advantageous related to that. So the North Node is square to this Mercury, but also square to my midheaven.
Yellow.
Okay. So, and then Mars is conjoined to Venus. So this should have been an interesting year. And it was also my Saturn return year. So what really are we dealing with here? Well, let's see if it becomes clear, and I'll tell you in a second. This is where I was in Philadelphia. Now, one of the things to admit, you can see there isn't much distinction. You can actually move this moon over into the 3rd house because it's very close to the cusp of it. And that's one of the problems where, depending on where you are in the world, like Philly isn't that far, even by plane, especially by plane, from Buffalo, New York. So the charts are very similar. So that wouldn't have been a good test of this. Well, let's look at the precest. And this is Leo rising, so it does emphasize my natal moon. That's interesting by conjunction, but we want to see the Mercury. The Mercury ends up in the 5th house. This is by precession. So it's the same Mercury at 20 degrees, just a few minutes difference. And then we have, I think this is Uranus, it is Uranus and Jupiter in the 7th house. So this might emphasize particular things. Now, the actual location where I was on my birthday, November 22nd, 1997, I was in Tiruvananthapuram, which also translates as Trivandrum, India. This is where I was. So my midheaven is emphasizing the Mercury here, conjoined to the Mercury, because remember, he's the lord of the year. The moon is in the 9th house, so it's descriptive of my situation. So which one seems to have nailed my year? Was it which one of these 4? I'll tell you. I would say it's my natal location and this precess chart. Why? And then you can judge for yourself. That year, the 30th year of life, I was an actor. And I ended up, a couple different things happened. Very big things happened. Related to some money that was due to me, I came home from India and essentially I had no place to stay. I knew I would get some money and I would have a job doing readers theater at a college where I used to do some directing. And I would get that money. And I also wanted to get some acting jobs, but I didn't have anything lined up. Well, roughly within a week, I got a call from one of the biggest theaters in the city to do a huge Shakespearean play, Midsummer Night's Dream. So it's going to be a huge production. And then I go to the bank to get what I think is going to be my last $100, and hoping I can make that last until I get to I guess a payment or check from the other theater company or the university. And there's $10,000 in the account. And I think it's a mistake, right? And I'm like, it has to be a mistake, right? It wasn't a mistake. It was money that was due to me. And I was like, word, right? So I got cast for this play. I ended up also getting another job where I started doing tech training. And that also is signified in this chart. And went through a temporary situation. I mean, I'm getting kind of personal here, but I don't, we've been sharing. I got in a, my partner who traveled with me in India, we had a separation, but we came back together. Another 5th house signification, she got pregnant. Right now, you said like you guys can read between the lines, and I'm public about this. I don't have any children, so she decided not to keep the child. Right. So that was another kind of thing, which is also suggested by this sun Pluto. So you might say like, well, you could use a Philadelphia one too. That's true, but I could have just stuck with the natal location. But what's not true, or what doesn't register for me in the same way, is the Tirthavananthapuram chart. So I would encourage you to do something like this, and that's why I think we can play with it. Let me just check the time, because we have a few more things to cover. We can at least do one chart. But there is a stipulation. You need to choose at least one chart that is fairly far from your natal location. Otherwise, you're not going to get like these two charts, even though Philly is an hour flight and 8-hour drive from Buffalo, it's still not far enough to kind of see a tangible difference. Whereas we're not going to do precession. That's not the test. We're just doing relocation. I just thought I'd add that in. But the farthest was definitely Tirthavananthapuram, Trivandrum, which doesn't really speak to me or my circumstances in terms of delineating the chart. So who wants to go and who has like a location?
You could use me, Sam. I have a birthday, but I know for sure I was on the other side of the world.
Okay, let's go with you.
All
right. So what year are we going to use?
We could use 2008.
Okay. All right. And just to kind of have, because your birthday is mid-year, which way are we going to go? Like,
we'll go forward into that.
Okay.
That birthday, yeah.
So it's after your birthday. So if I say, is there a particular event?
Yeah, that year, yeah.
Okay. Give me the date, if you don't mind.
The date of the event, it was a process, but culminated in December of 2008.
December 1st, 2008. And we're going to use the natal location. We're going to use the current solar return. So I'm going to do this twice. All right, so that was a Scorpio rising year, and it's for June 2008. All right, it was June 21st, 2008. It changes. All right, the other thing is we want to do it for where you actually were. Where were you?
I'll spell it for you. It's Balaka, Balaka, and the country is Malawi, Malawi.
I found it.
Okay, great.
All right, let's go. Okay. All right. We might have to go with 3 wheels because we want to see her. Bear with me here. I'm going to get 3 wheels up because we also want to be able to see Kara's natal chart just to be able to judge. I'm not going to do a tri-wheel. Is that okay? Or do you want a tri-wheel?
Whatever works best.
Okay, fine. I'm going to do this. Okay. And we're going to do Kara 1, 2, 3. And then let me share the screen. Which Zoom would make this easier? Okay. All right, guys, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone beyond and between. So this is your natal chart, right? You're a Gemini rising?
Yep, that's right.
Right. And then over here, chart 2, this is going to be for Chico, her natal location. So that ends up with a Scorpio rising. And then Balaka, Malawi, right? 1 o'clock in the morning has an Aries rising. So Mars is the Lord for both. Now, how old is she in 2008?
Jesus. Come on. This can't be that difficult. 2008.
27.
27, 4th house perfection year.
Yeah.
All right, so Mercury's the Lord of the year, right? So let's test this. Mercury is dealing with an 8th house theme in the solar return chart for Chico. Now, natally, she has, it's not Casimir, but she has a combust Mercury in the same degree as her sun. So it may be something that she doesn't perceive or that really is gripping, that might even be overwhelming, right? Because it is Mercury combust, which is the suggestion of what it means. But Mercury in this chart, what?
Oh.
It's not. Kazemi, remember, it has to be within 17 to 18 minutes of orb, right? On either side. And this is a full 38 minutes away. So Mercury ends up in the 8th. So in the solar return, the Lord of the year here, but the Lord of the ascendant Mars is conjoined to the South Node and midheaven. Mars is also opposing Neptune in this chart. So there may be some way in which he's dealing with some career issue or some way in which some cause that she's dealing with, and maybe some frustration and drainage related to that. But then let's go to Malawi. So one of the things that we see is that her Mercury ends up in the 3rd as the Lord of the year. Mars is going to have the same dynamic, but it's between the 5th and the 11th. So what do you think happened? You know, and Sun, by the way, is in a wide opposition to Pluto. So what do you think? And the Sun is cadent. I think actually, if we were using classes and going with Shay's model, the Sun would actually be in the 3rd house, comparable to being in the 9th, but we won't quibble about that. But what do you think is kind of going on in her life? She's going toward a lunar return, by the way, too.
Well, a change of her home or foundational self roots.
Yeah, her roots. Okay. Anyone else want to chime in?
Is she there in any sort of social worker teaching capacity because of the 3rd and the 6th being activated because of that Mercury?
That makes sense. And so we look to Kara. Kara, what do you say?
I was doing some nonprofit social work, but that's not necessarily the main event of the year, but that's part of my history.
Mm-hmm.
Now, wait, just to be clear, was the main event related to being where you were?
Yes, it did play. Yeah, it did play a part.
Okay. All right. Anything else? I mean, there's some standouts here. Let's look at this Mercury.
Was there a death? A
Kara?
transform,
No.
Okay.
or was that a death and rebirth of transformation?
What does that mean?
Of identity, because I'm looking at the opposition with Pluto to the Sun, and I'm also looking at South Node with Mars and Saturn. I mean, it's as just a grouping, but that opposition that you're talking with Neptune and the nodal.
Let me chime in, and also a different way
Right?
related to you, because you're talking about a kind of ego death. Did you get fired?
No.
Okay.
No, and there was not a death, but later when we reveal what happened, there might be something that you could interpret in a certain way. So.
Okay, so you didn't get fired. There was no sense of loss related, or was there a sense of loss related to the job?
No.
Okay. Does everyone understand why I asked that question, even though it's wrong? It's Mars conjoined to the South Node to the midheaven, right?
With Venus being combust, the sun and ruling the seventh house of both solar returns, was the relationship an issue that year?
That was not the highlighted issue, no.
Okay. All right, let's go back to Mercury, see if Mercury gives us either, because he's in different positions in both charts. So he's in the 8th house here, which could be suggestive related to loss. And then here in the 3rd house, this could be more so about something related to communication, highlighting even a trine to the North Node. Let me see, he's also the ruler of the Saturn.
In the other chart also, so that would kind of echo it.
Say that again?
In the other solar return, it would rule the 8th and the 11th.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of get an echo of what you're just talking about.
Mm-hmm. As versus he rules only the 3rd and the 6th here. So this is interesting. All right, you might have stumped us here, Kara. Good job. So what happened?
Well, it was a 4th house perfection year. I became a mother and I adopted my son overseas. I was living and working in Africa. And so, the Chico chart, the one on the far right, emphasizes some of the themes I think the best, although I'd have to look more at the Malawi chart too. But, the 10th, 4th house dynamic was actually a power dynamic over my child because the authorities were not releasing him during the adoption process. So there was a ton of challenge. And so the Sun Pluto too had some of that dynamic going on. Lots of frustration and separation from the child while we were trying to get the adoption done. The death part that could be picked up on too was that there was originally another child we were trying to adopt who was taken from us. And so there was a very significant loss at the same time as really wonderful.
Oh, that's literal.
And that technically was the month or so before this solar return, but of course, still energy still.
Yeah, it's related. But why I said that's literal and almost chilling, especially thinking about Mercury, both I guess on some level could work. Well, no, they weren't siblings, right?
No.
But there are 2 children, which are the twins. Mercury's in the 8th, so it's almost as if the cosmos said, "You can get one."
Yes. Yeah, and I think the plan was always the one, but we needed the other to lure us to the one. So yeah, that's interesting.
So
yeah, and with Venus ruling your natal 5th and being in the 9th up here in the solar return, adopting from another place than way far away seems to be highlighted as well.
Yeah, very much. And my natal moon is in Aquarius in the 9th. So it was already kind of there from the beginning, parenting in a different way and abroad. Yeah.
which seems to, it registers the ruler of the 9th being in the 4th is kind of like dealing with the sense of home, which is not what we get here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we do get something different. The moon in the 11th house does signify other people's children. So that is some measure of signification. The only thing that doesn't seem clear, I mean, like you actually could go with, either one of these charts in some degree. It's interesting. The ruler of the, this chart of the Malawi chart does end up in the 5th. Mm-hmm. So there is emphasis related to a child, but maybe even some sense of loss. We go to the Chico chart. This is more so about being at the top of the chart, dealing, yes, but power struggles. But we have to look at the Mercury, and Mercury ruling the 8th, again, some testimony of loss. So I wouldn't rule out completely the Malawi chart, but, you find more related to the themes of home, as you said, because you're the authority of your life from the natal chart. Now,
that the Mars opposite Neptune, I mean, it was a very long, arduous process without any knowledge if it was going to work out. And so that Neptune was really, really strong, and it makes sense with it being angular to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Got you. All right. So
Oh, and I'll go back to the Sun Venus conjunction again. You fell in love when any child that comes into your life, you fall totally in love. So I can see how that's working too. And I celebrate you for what you did.
Thank you.
and
How
How
old
old
is
is-
he now?
13.
Oh, okay.
you got
Doing well?
Yeah, he's doing great. He was
Oh.
5 months when I met him. So
Beautiful. All right. So we already done that. So what time is best for you, right? So now we're going to talk a little bit about timing. And it's all in the timing. One of the things that's most notable about, am I sharing my screen? Yeah, you guys can see it. Is that modern techniques are very much in trying to time things related to the solar return. So must remember that the solar return chart can only emphasize what's in the natal. So classical astrologers emphasize time lords with the solar returns, but modern astrologers are fonder of looking at primary or secondary progressions or solar arcs. General conceptions is that this is what I've seen in a number of texts, and I think it's somewhat true, but maybe you've not heard this before. So it was mind-blowing when I first heard it. The solar return comes into effect maybe about 3 months before the native's birthday and remains in effect up to 9 months afterwards. So it does cover like the full year. The next return comes more online after that, right? Again, 3 months before. Drawing on the wisdom of classical astrologer Marinus, we might also use lunar returns for known important months, paying attention to the position of the natal moon, the lord of the ascendant for the solar return, and other indicators in the solar return chart. Now, you might say, like, well, why did you say known important months? Because if you have a client coming to you, okay, I'll pick on Kara. Kara's birthday is literally, when is it? Almost, well, it's the 22nd. So that's pretty much 10 days from now. To do her consultation, and if I were trying to pick out, for a whole year, it would be labor intensive to the point where it might not even be sustainable to do lunar returns from June and her lunar return all the way to like June of 2022. So in other words, you ain't got time for all that, right? But what you may have time for, let's say, I have a big event, speaking engagement sometime in October. So you may look at the lunar return in relation to the solar return for that time frame in October. An example I might give you, and this is cold. I didn't test this. I just wanted to illustrate it, meaning I'm not, I'm just using it for whatever here. So this is the solar return down here for this particular year for my 53rd year of life, right? My 6th house perfection year, right? And again, we don't need to go so much into my chart, but you have it. Capricorn rising, as I mentioned to you before, sun is in, it either would be, depending on if you were using Plastis, it probably still would be in the 11th house. So it's in the succeeding house, which makes sense because I think my son was in the 2nd house the following year or the previous year. Anyway, what I wanted to see and test is that this date, oh, here it is. This is the upper right. May 3rd was a huge date for me, right? Of this, just last month, literally. I'll tell you in a second what happened, but it was a big day. So I want to point out some things for you. So one thing is that you see, and again, I'm doing this cold. This is the lunar return for the moon's position closest to May 3rd. So this is literally about 13 days before May 3rd, the big date for me. So I wanted to test, like, Yeah, is this true? Remember, I always keep a skeptical mind to some degree. Yeah, okay, whatever. Let's see. So what we're looking at is how does this lunar return shape up in relation to the solar return in terms of the timing for things? Well, it's kind of chilling. Venus and Uranus are conjoined along with the ascendant for this lunar return, which conjoins in the 5th house. Okay, that's significant. And then the Lord of the year is the moon, right? So again, we're going to be looking for the moon, and the moon is widely opposite. It's in the 8th house in this solar return chart. It has a square to Venus within 2 degrees, because remember it's Leo. It has a in conjunct to the ascendant, and widely it has this square to Uranus. But we also have corroboration of Venus Uranus conjoined to the solar return Uranus to the exact degree for the 5th house in the solar return. Taurus, by the way, in my chart is in the 3rd house. So what happened on May 3rd? Or what do you think happened on May 3rd? Some of you may know because you're friends with me, but others of you don't know. So I guess I want to hear from the people who don't know me well. So Kelly, you're out.
Jeez,
Or
Sam,
John or Marcella.
I don't know anything.
Yeah, John and Marcella, you're out. I don't know if Sue knows.
I do.
Okay. Then you're out. Anybody want to guess? Let's just think on the surface. What do you think Venus Uranus is about?
Change in relationships.
Change in relationships. What else? Because Venus is the ruler of Taurus, so she's in her domicile. So it's a 3rd house thing. And she's opposite to the Venus for the solar return.
Do you consider the 3rd house, the move that you made, to be a 3rd house or a 9th house move?
Well, that's what's interesting because Venus is opposing Venus in that chart. So, and Venus is in the 1st house.
Recently, and that's got to be, I don't know when though.
What? You say that? Say that again?
He moved recently, but I don't know
did.
when. And that's
So-
certainly the signification of traveling, at least from that standpoint. But is there a 4th house connection? That's what we see the moon in that one chart in the 4th. So
And so and the moon is in the 4th related to the lunar return, and she's square to Mercury, which is the ruler of the 7th in my natal chart. And remember, I'm in a 6th house perfection year. I'm in a lunar perfection year. So moon is also square to the sun. So there's definitely something happened. What happened? And again, because I want to get to other things.
so relationship change.
May 3rd, I divorced my wife and moved to Santa Fe.
Okay.
I literally I divorced her amicably, don't worry. It wasn't kind of like, yo, I'm out, and left her. It was agreed and understood. But I divorced her and got on the plane and moved to Santa Fe. That's literally what happened that day. So I wanted to see, does it show up in a lunar return closest to May 3rd? And does it relate to the solar return? Absolutely. So that, again,
right on the angle there.
boom.
Yeah, I mean, that brings you right to the issue.
So again, the reason why I emphasize that you should do it with known events is because, to try to do 12 months, that's a lot of work. So, don't go apeshit over it because that is not sustainable. But you could do it for yourself for the year if you want to take the time for that. That makes sense. Okay, and that's the same thing, but just I thought I would do it with the bi-wheel. I want to mention a few techniques that relate to timing. One is talked about quite a bit, and it's the easiest. You can use the sun's transit to points in the solar return to track the possibility and nature of events. So if you have your solar return Jupiter at 28 degrees Virgo, then you might experience something Jupiterian, fortunate or opening up vistas for you about 1 degree before or after around September 20th when the sun is at that particular degree. So that's something you might use, especially if you're talking about the Lord of the Year. Angular solar return planets should be allowed aspects by conjunction, opposition, and square. So you want to emphasize more of the hard aspects. Another way, and again, you guys know I'm a skeptic, or at least I've said it enough. I'm sharing this method, but I'm skeptical of it. The way is that you can tell the time for the year, time of year for the activation. So planets midway in a house will likely manifest midway through the year. This is especially, something you can see clearly if you're using a quadrant-based house system. Count the number of degrees in a house and divide by 12. So if a house has 37 degrees, then you divide it by 12. Each month is going to progress about 3 degrees in 5 minutes. So you could do that. A planet at 15 degrees from a house's start will be about 5 months in, just to give you an example in that case. Because remember, we're not talking about literally 30 degrees, but 37. So it's going to be a month shy of exactly in the middle. Again, I am sharing this because I think it's interesting. I don't know if it's absolutely true. All right. Here's another weird one that I think is true. I won't say weird. It's interesting. From Deanna Rose, another author. Now, this is where you do need an event, or if you have an event in mind. So if you know your daughter is getting married or your son is getting married, then you might try this to see, is that lined up with the solar return? Calculate the amount of days from the native's birthday or the solar return, then divide it by 4. So for instance, if you have 259 days from a birthday, it will yield 65 degrees. Then you would add that to the degrees of the solar return midheaven, depending on what you want related to, like if it's a career topic, or the ascendant, if it's a more general life topic. The example I have for you, I told you my mom died. And this is my natal chart. My mom died December 13th, 1994. So this is the solar return. That means roughly 21 days after my birthday, my mom passed. Okay, well, here's something interesting. What did I say? Divide those number of days by 4, and then add that number of degrees to the ascendant or solar return midheaven. So what's 21 divided by 4?
Little over 5 degrees.
Exactly right. A little over 5 degrees. Now, if I add that to the ascendant of 1 degree Libra, that puts me close to 6-7 degrees of Libra. That is directly opposed to my Saturn if I use Placidus in the first house. Right? So you might say like, well, that's 6 degrees and some change. I think that's close enough that it was descriptive of a Saturnine event for me. Now you could say, well, could I have done that? It doesn't seem to have the same potency doing it from 2 degrees Cancer. It doesn't connect to anything. So I'm not going to do it from the midheaven. Even though classically, the midheaven is suggestive of the mother. Classically. But when I saw it from the ascendant, that's something to consider. And I was like, oh, it connects to my Saturn. And I know this is a significant event. I haven't found this to be true necessarily with all things, but again, this is for your consideration and related to timing.
Sam, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you, in the case of the MC versus the ascendant, did you feel that more on a personal level, or did that affect you professionally?
When my mom died, I felt my world ended.
Exactly. So it makes sense then that it will be more sensitive from the ascendant standpoint, even though one could argue that there's an echo along the MC-IC axis as well.
Correct.
But, yeah, I can definitely understand that.
So there's another way in which you can advance and get into timing called the 24-hour progression. And the idea is to treat each month of the chart, to treat each house of the chart as a month with approximately 2 hours representing 1 month. Now, you can do this using Solar Fire. There's 2 ways actually to do it, as it spells out here, dynamic transits and progressions, blah, 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 if you have Solar Fire. But the key focus, regardless of what program you use, is given to the progressed angles and the moon, because that's what's going to shift. You'll see here, I progressed my return, which you might remember as cap. The sun hasn't shifted that much, which makes sense because we're talking about really during a 24-hour period. So it would be weird if the sun was in a whole different sign. What is going to shift faster are the angles, because the angles are the fastest shifting thing in a chart. So I'm looking at that date, May 3rd, which is roughly about 5. It's in conjunct to, Capricorn. So what's the next in conjunct to Capricorn? It will actually be at some point Leo, right? In terms of moving counterclockwise, which is kind of how, I should say clockwise. So that's why we have Leo on the cusp of that as, the time frame from Capricorn, if we were going to count going that way. So where would be May 3rd? Same thing for the midheaven from Libra. And this is just exact. You will notice the planets, though, don't shift much because, again, it's within a 24-hour period. So what are you looking for? What you're looking for is a relationship of the angles to the solar return, not the natal chart, and not the solar return chart. Even though this ascendant is widely opposite to the moon, it's really pretty close to the solar return moon in terms of that. The other thing that's interesting is that this this midheaven is actually close to the Mercury, which shows up. There's an opposition. So that's suggestive that there's some kind of 4th house, 10th house thing happening, which did happen. I literally uprooted myself even a few days before May 3rd, because I technically moved my stuff out and gave it to the movers April, I believe, 28th. So some days before. So it might have been even more so with Mercury being opposite to the midheaven. Again, this is another technique, how you do it, 24-hour progression. The other way in which you can do it is you can literally progress. I'll show you after I think I'm finished, because actually right on time, 4:59 my time, I am done, and that's my contact information, but I'm going to show you a few things. So I'm going to show you how you might do it. So when you go to Solar Fire, let me make this a little bigger. When you go to Solar Fire and you go to mail, I believe this is the way you do it. Yes. What you can do, select the time frame you want, select whether it's natal. Can you see where I'm showing return and ingresses? Do you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
And this is with Solar Fire. So I know it may be different with different programs, so forgive me. You can go right to where it says progress solar return. And I'm gonna do it for June 12th, 2021, and then press OK. And you'll see, because that's a whole month and some change, that still the sun is where it's supposed to be, but the moon has progressed into Pisces. And then the ascendant has progressed from Leo or near the end of Leo into Libra, which makes sense because it's literally about a month after, in terms of time frame. And so also the midheaven has changed. Only the angles will change. The sun and obviously the other planets will change, but that's because, again, this is just for a 24-hour period. So they're not going to change dramatically. So if you see something dramatic, like your sun is going, oh, can I make it a bit bigger? I can try.
Just open up the chart, Sam.
I did. Wait. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm not sharing the right thing. So hold on.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, we're all looking at that little
You're
thumbnail.
looking at the little one, and I was looking at the big one. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you,
Sue.
thank you. It's all right.
Good job, Sue.
Yeah. So this is what I'm looking at. Sorry that I was making you look at that little tiny thing. So that's how you progress it, which makes sense. Again, I did it for May 3rd, which technically now, right, is a full month and some change away. So it's just a way of advancing. Now, again, you're going to be looking at this progressed solar return, just like you would do with a natal chart in relation to, you know, a natal progressed to progressed. You would look at it in relation to your solar return. So what might be interesting is, or what might have been interesting to kind of see when the progressed solar return was also in Cancer and directly opposite what things were percolating. So I could go back, and that probably would have been, if that were May, it probably would be sometime in March.
If I can ask, there's 3 planets at 0 degrees. And I don't use this a lot, but that means that your progressed moon is just starting in Pisces and the sun in Sag and Venus
That's
in
where-
Scorpio. But
It
they're
would
all
mean,
yeah.
Yes, it would mean for the progressed solar return, not for my chart, right? From my
Right.
my natal chart. So that means that per what's happening with my progressed solar return, this is a square, which means something is jumping off.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
I'll just say, that's all I'll say. Something is jumping off, but I don't know what. But I think something is jumping off. That's all I'll say. So
Well, you are wearing a Superman shirt.
that's what,
That's our
We
reach.
love it.
For Sam.
right. Although John and I were joking at the start, it's like it could be for solar return. And what's funny is that Superman is powered by the sun, by a yellow sun. So I just wore it because I like the red and black, and I just felt like being a little more relaxed. And I was like, I'm gonna wear this tee today. So, are there any other questions? We are at, believe it or not, we're at time. But we've covered a lot. That was more the modern with the classical. Your head might be spinning a bit, and that's okay.
Well, there is a question I have that was a technicality that you drew in, and not to elaborate, and I could look at the book, but it has to do with the I think the Arab astrologer that had the manifestations of the years, like the moon was 1 and it would be 4 years, and then Mercury was
Yes.
10 and it'd be at
Absolute
14.
star.
How do you connect the age with why is it 1 year, 4 years and 14? Was that relative for that person, or is that everybody?
That's everybody.
Oh, okay.
That's a Time Lord technique he's using applied for the planets. Let me just,
Oh, I see. So in the Time Lord, the way it calculates.
it's a different kind of
which has-
Time Lord. So
which has
during, let me just get to that particular slide.
But would that have something to do with then how it rotates every 10 years? It goes to a next quadrant or something. So somehow it's all mixed in. With
Well, let
that,
me
but-
get to that
Okay.
point. That particular slide from Abu Mashar. And now, of course, it's somewhat elusive for me. Here it is. And let me share the screen. And make it bigger. So some measure of the logic is related to some measure of the movement, a certain way in which the planets move. So every 8 years we have with Venus, I mean, that's clear. We have, you know, how it makes a 5-point star and has its retrograde and its transit over the sun. The sun at 19 years relates to more so the Metonic cycle, you know, as the intersection between the sun and, you know, the lunar points. Mars definitely will deal with particular returns at every 15 years. Jupiter comes back every 12 years, and Saturn comes back every roughly 30 years. I think the Mercury one is divided up by, you know, we have a Mercury return, definitively a solar Mercury return around 33 years old. So that's when Sun and Mercury come back together around that age. And then there's another one, I think, some years before that. I want to say it's 16, but I don't quote me on that. It's kind of half that point. But the moon has the first 4 years, because I think the moon does operate on a certain 4-year cycle. Let me explain. And you can test this out. It kind of blew my mind when I discovered it, but I don't hear too many astrologers talk about it. There was a new moon on the 10th, which is a solar eclipse. 4 years ago, around that date, if you check it, just get your ephemeris out. 4 years ago, which would be what, 2017? Then that was a full moon. So every 4 years, full moons become new moons become full moons. Every 4 years, roughly around that time frame. That might be the source of where he got that. I don't know exactly. I can't ask him anymore.
Thanks.
Sure.
All right. What you have in the chat is the whole workshop. So I would download that now before we close the chat, so that you can access this. And then, of course, you'll have access to the recording. If you have additional questions, you can email me at unlockastrology@gmail.com. And I'm on Twitter. Zyman knows this. Now with a new account, Unlock Astro. So all one word. So you can reach me there. And Kelly also knows this. That's how we connected. And thank you. You guys are troopers. Because we didn't even get a break in the afternoon, right? My Mars and Capricorn just marched.
And my moon in Capricorn followed.
Yeah. So I'm glad you guys kind of trudged along. I don't know if you have any questions. You probably will after your brain settles down. But you have the rudiments now of being able to do solar returns, and you might see that. Well, I hope so. Do you feel like you have a little more grasp related to solar returns?
Yeah, definitely a little bit more. It's a different way of thinking for me because I'm completely modern, and so I had a real mental struggle orientating myself to the display and also to force my brain to not see things the way I typically see them. So, but after we got into it, it started to route.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to push off.
All right. Have fun.
I like that, Marcella. Yeah.
Thanks,
Right?
Sam.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for coming.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Invaluable.
Thank you so much.